present 3 songs and 1 poem. In 1942, a song titled Rosie the Riveter was written by Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb. Released in early 1943, it was performed by various artists with popular band leaders of that day, and is believed to be the inspiration for the iconic image painted by Norman Rockwell. She had the painting had Rosie on the lunchbox. There are a number of versions of the Soldier's Christmas poem. The one for tonight is specific to the soldiers of New Zealand. These will be performed by Lauren Farina and Alice Holliker. Then, Lily Marlene. In 1915, as a 22-year-old soldier fighting in the First World War, Hans Liep wrote a poem to express the anguish of separation from his sweetheart, a grocer's daughter named Lily. Put to music in 1938 and recorded for the first time in 1939, it became a popular song for troops on both sides of the conflict. By the time Liep died in 1983, his song had been translated into 48 languages, including Hebrew and Latin. Also, In the Mood, made famous by Glenn Miller in 1940, and has lived on through the ages.
Girls attend their favorite cocktail bars, sipping martinis, munching caviar. There's a girl who's really putting them to shame. Rosie is her name. All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter. Keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That little frail can do more than a male will do. Rosie the Riveter. Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine. When they gave her a production E, she was as proud as a girl can be. There's something true about red, white, and blue, about Rosie the Riveter. Everyone stops to admire the scene. Rosie at work on the B-19. She's never twittery, nervous, or jittery. Rosie the Riveter. What if she's smeared full of grease and oil, doing her bit for the old Lend-Lease? She keeps the gang around. They love to hang around. Rosie the Riveter. Senator Jones, who is in the know, shouted these words on the radio. Berlin will hear about, Moscow will cheer about. Rosie the Riveter.
'Twas the night before Christmas. He lived all alone in a one-bedroom house made of plaster and stone. I had come down the chimney with presents to give, and to see just who in this home did live. I looked all about. A strange sight I did see. No tinsel, no presents, not even a tree. No stocking by the fire, just boots filled with sand. On the wall hung pictures of far, distant lands, with medals and badges, awards of all kind. A sobering thought came through to my mind. For this house was different, so dark and dreary. I knew I had found the home of a soldier once I could see clearly. I'd heard stories about them. I had to see more. So I walked down the hall and pushed open the door, and there he lay, sleeping, silent, alone, curled up on the floor of his one-bedroom home. His head was clean-shaven, his weathered face tan. I soon understood this was more than a man, for I realized the families that I'd seen that night owed their lives to these men who were willing to fight. His face so gentle, his room in such disorder. Not how I pictured a United States soldier. Was this the hero of whom I'd just read? Curled up in his poncho, a floor for his bed? Soon, round the world, the children would play and grown-ups would celebrate on a bright Christmas day. And they enjoyed freedom each month of the year because of soldiers like this one, lying here. I couldn't help but wonder how many lay alone on a cold Christmas Eve in a land far from home. Just the very thought brought a tear to my eye. I dropped to my knees and started to cry. soldier awakened, and I heard a rough voice. Santa, don't cry. This life is my choice. I fight for freedom. I don't ask for more. My life is my God, my country, my core. With that, he rolled over and drifted off into sleep. I couldn't control it. I continued to weep. I watched him for hours, so silent and still. I noticed he shivered from the cold night's chill. So I took off my jacket, the one made of red, and I covered this soldier from his toes to his head. And I put on his t-shirt of gray and black, with an eagle and an army patch embroidered on the back. And although it barely fit me, I began to swell with pride. And for a shining moment, I was United States Army deep inside. I didn't want to leave him on that cold, dark night, this guardian of honor, so willing to fight. Then the soldier rolled over, whispered, with a voice so clean and pure, "Carry on, Santa. It's Christmas Day. All is secure." One look at my watch, and I knew he was right. Merry Christmas to all, and to all, a good night.
Outside the barracks, by the corner light, I'll always stand and wait for you at night. We will create a world for two. I'll wait for you the whole night through. For you, Lily Marlene. For you, Lily Marlene. Vor der Kaserne, vor dem großen Tor, stand eine Laterne und stand sie noch daran. So wollen wir da uns wiedersehen, bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen. Bugler tonight, don't play the call to arms. I want another evening with your charms. Then we will say goodbye and part. I'll always keep you in my heart. With me, Lily Marleen. With me, Lily Marleen. Unsere beiden Schatten sahen wie ein Haus, das wir so lieb was hatten, sah man gleich daraus. Und alle Leute sollen es sehen, wenn wir bei der Laterne stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen. Give me a rose to show how much you care. Tied to the stem, a lock of golden hair. Surely tomorrow you'll feel blue, but then will come a love that's new. For you, Lily Marleen. For you, Lily Marleen.
Our last section tonight are the testimonies of ordinary people and extraordinary events. Zoe Linz and Nadia Nugent will present the experiences of several women and their lives in the American home front. Pete Warren will present the first-hand account of a French reporter in Japan in the spring of 1945. Heather Workman will present the observations of Corporal Charles W. Lindbergh, the last surviving member of the team that raised the first flag on the crest of Mount Suribachi. And Ethan Shawkamp will be the voice of Molly Painter Downs, an English novelist who wrote about Londoners celebrating the end of the war in Europe.
Services and did some very nasty fighting because he joined the Rangers. The Rangers were the equivalent of the Commandos. He worked with the British Commandos, the French Marquis, and the Norwegians. He was always with a group that would go in first. For instance, he was in France before D-Day, twice. I wrote to him every single day, long, long letters. He and I were both interested in history. I could tell every day where he was. He would just make some reference to something in history, and I would know exactly where he was. So this was really fun that I could follow what he was doing. It was very painful too, because we were very close. To help with the war effort, I joined a group that rolled bandages. Beautiful tablecloths, sheets, and even skirts were cut up and rolled into bandages. And we needed a lot. My sister-in-law was single, and so she went to the USOs. Most of the time at the USOs, what the girls did was to provide food, donuts and coffee, and would lend an ear so that the soldiers could talk. And then there were dances. In those days, as soon as a woman married, she lost her job. In the summer of 1941, 5 of us in the library were about to get married, and we all expected to lose our jobs. We felt pretty strong in number, so we asked Dr. Van Hussen whether we would be allowed to come back. They debated all that summer, and we were allowed to come back. My sister-in-law was the first teacher on this island to be allowed to continue after she married. She married in February of 1943. We were right in the middle of the war, so she was allowed to stay on. You know, married women really began their fight to stay on jobs, and then later on to try for equal pay after the war. When we first worked, there was no such thing, for instance, as a coffee break. And there was no such thing as leaving at 5 o'clock if there was still work to do. I stayed many a night until 6 o'clock or 2 o'clock on a Saturday because there was work to be done. You didn't get paid for that. There was no such thing as overtime. We were very used to long hours. I was used to working 2 nights a week until 10 o'clock and every other weekend. And if I didn't work the full weekend, I would work Saturday one week and Sunday another week. So there was no such thing as a 5-day week.
I went into college and was 19 when I left. It was 2 years and 8 months at Tufts University. We squeezed 4 years into that time. There were no vacations. We had a day for Christmas and a day for Thanksgiving, and that was about it. The idea was to get classes through so that they would be ready for war. I had several friends in my college class who were in the service. Almost immediately, there were 2 young men who were freshmen who left after a month. Both disappeared. They were shot down on a military flight over the North Atlantic. I think all our patterns of life, particularly our romances, our attitudes towards objects, our attitudes towards the future, our attitudes about education, all had to do with the war. I cannot imagine a day that I spent from the time I was 14 until I was 19 that I wasn't aware of the war for a good part of the day, and it had an impact on everything that I chose to do. There was no point at which, except being asleep, that I wasn't aware of the war, because I had a great number of friends who died. I had one college classmate whose fraternal twin died. After she got the message, we just simply sat for the entire night trying to think of things to say to her. We couldn't come up with anything very extraordinary. I think for girls and women, and perhaps boys and men, the war forced them to grow up prematurely. It made them far more serious about the bare realities of life, death, values. It robbed them, in a sense, of some childhood. Perhaps it was a good thing. But it made us more critical of later generations who seemed to have a somewhat easier time. War, constantly. I think it's why it had such a profound effect upon my generation. Shoes became scarce.
Now, there must have been shoe rationing.
You know, I don't remember how they issued shoes, but being in college, shoes were very important. And we were down to 2 or 3 pairs of shoes. So you never let your friend borrow your shoes.
When it rained at Auburn, we all took our shoes off and carried them.
Some big reporter from New York City came down to see how Southern college girls were living during the war. And he found us walking around the campus barefoot.
So he went back to New York and wrote this long article, how Southern women went to college without shoes on. Well, the Dean of Women called us all into a big assembly, and she said,
"Now, girls, I don't care if it's your only pair of shoes. Put them on when you walk across the campus."
She said,
"We can't have publicity like this in New York about our Southern campus."
so we all then wore our shoes. If they fell apart,
They fell apart.
Night of March 9th, 1945, 334 B-29 bombers from the 20th Air Force, U.S. Army Air Corps, under the command of General Curtis LeMay, departed the Marianas Islands for Tokyo. Their mission was to burn the city to the ground with incendiary bombs, and this is an eyewitness account of the impact of that raid. By the way, this was the single most destructive air raid in all of history. Left 100,000 Japanese civilians dead and over 1 million homeless. The inhabitants stayed heroically put as the bombs dropped, faithfully obeying the order that each family defend its own home. But how could they fight the fires of that wind blowing when a single house might be hit by 10 or even more of the bombs, each weighing up to 6.5 pounds? They were raining down by the thousands. As they fell, cylinders scattered a kind of flaming dew that skittered along the roof, setting fire to everything it splashed and spreading a wash of dancing flames everywhere. The first version of napalm, of dismal fame. The meager defenses of those thousands of amateur firemen, feeble jets of hand-pumped water, wet mats and sand to be thrown in the bombs when one could get close enough to the terrible heat were completely inadequate. Roofs collapsed under the bomb's impact, and within minutes the frail houses of wood and paper were aflame, lighted from the inside like paper lanterns. The hurricane-force wind puffed up great clots of flame, and sent burning planks planing through the air to fell people and set fire to what they touched. Flames from a distant cluster of houses would suddenly spring up close at hand, traveling at the speed of a forest fire. And screaming families abandoned their homes. Sometimes the women had already left, carrying their babies and dragging crates or mattresses. Too late, the circle of fire had closed off their street. Sooner or later, everyone was surrounded by fire. Proper air raid clothing, as recommended by the government to the civilian population, consisted of a heavily padded hood over the head and shoulders that was supposed chiefly to protect people's ears from bomb blast explosions, that is. But for months, Tokyo had mostly been firebound. The hoods flamed under the rain of sparks. People who did not burn from the feet up burned from the head down. Mothers who carried their babies strapped to their backs Japanese style would discover too late that the padding that enveloped the infant had caught fire. Refugees clutching their packages crowded into the rare clear spaces, crossroads, gardens, and parks, but the bundles caught fire even faster than clothing, and the throng flamed from the inside. Sirens sounded the all clear about 5 a.m. on March 10th. Those still working in the half of the city that had not been attacked. The other half burned for 12 hours more. I talked to someone who had inspected the scene on March 11th. What was most awful, my witness told me, was having to get off his bicycle every couple of feet to pass over the countless bodies strewn through the streets. There was still a light wind blowing, and some of the bodies, reduced to ashes, were simply scattering like sand. In many sectors, passage was blocked by whole incinerated crowds.
At 8 a.m. on February 23rd, a patrol of 40 men from 3rd Platoon E Company, the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, led by 1st Lieutenant Harold G. Schreier, assembled at the base of Mount Suribachi. The platoon's mission was to take the crater of Suribachi's peak and raise the U.S. flag. As a member of the 1st Combat Patrol to scale Mount Suribachi, Corporal Lindbergh took his 72-pound flamethrower and started the torturous climb up the rough terrain to the top. At approximately 10:20 a.m., the flag was hoisted on a steel pipe above the island. The sight of the small American flag flying from atop Mount Suribachi thrilled men all over the island, and for the first time during World War II, an American flag was flying above what was considered traditional Japanese territory. This symbol of victory sent a wave of strength to the battle-weary fighting men below and struck a further mental blow against the island's defenders. Marine Corps photographer Sergeant Lou Lowry captured this first flag raising on film just as the enemy hurled a grenade in his direction. Dodging the grenade, Lowry hurled his body over the edge of the crater and tumbled 50 feet. His camera lens was shattered, but he and his film were safe. As Corporal Lindbergh would later remark, Suribachi was easy to take. It was getting there that was so hard. Of the 40-man patrol, 36 were killed or wounded on Iwo Jima, including Lindbergh himself, who would be shot through the stomach and arm a week later on March 1st, 1945. For his heroism, Lindbergh would receive the Purple Heart and Silver Star Medal with a citation reading in part. Repeatedly exposing himself to hostile grenades and machine gun fire in order that he might reach and neutralize enemy pillboxes at the base of Mount Suribachi, Corporal Lindbergh courageously approached within 10 or 15 yards of the emplacements before discharging his weapon, thereby assuring the annihilation of the enemy and the successful completion of this platoon's mission. While engaging in his attack on hostile cave positions on March 1st, he fearlessly exposed himself to accurate enemy fire and was subsequently wounded and evacuated.
When the day finally came, it was like no other day that anyone can remember. It had a flavor of its own, and extemporaneousness, which gave it something of the quality of a vast, happy village fete. As people wandered about, sat, sang, and slept against a slimmer background of trees and grass, flowers, water. Apparently, the desire to assist in London celebration combusted spontaneously in the bosom of every family, from the smallest babies, with their hair done in red, white, and blue ribbons, to beaming elderly couples who, utterly without self-consciousness, strolled up and down the streets, arm in arm, in red, white, and blue paper hats. Even the dogs wore immense tricolored bows. The bells had begun to peal, and after the night's storm, London was having that perfect, hot English summer's day which one sometimes feels is to be found only in the imaginations of the lyric poets. The girls, in their thin, bright dresses, heightened the impression that the city had been taken over by an enormous family picnic. The number of extraordinarily pretty young girls who presumably were hidden on working days inside the factories and government offices was astonishing. Strolling with their uniformed boys, arms candidly around one another, they provided a constant, gay, simple, marginal decoration to the big, solemn moments of the day. The crowds milled back and forth between the Palace, Westminster, Trafalgar Square, and Piccadilly Circus. When they got tired, they simply sat down on grass, on doorsteps, on the curb, and watched other people, or spread handkerchiefs over their faces and took a nap. Everybody appeared determined to see the King and the Queen and Mr. Churchill all at once, and few could have been disappointed.
Some music for you, but before we do that, I'd like to call for all the performers to stand and be acknowledged by the crowd. Everybody, please. A couple more quick announcements here. Can I just get a quick show of hands? How many of you guys have been to or participated in one or more of these events now? Okay, excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This was something Ms. Pizzino and I put together, again, 3 years ago, and it's kind of my dream to see this happen over these years. So, also, there will be a small reception outside. Food was provided by the Niskayuna Co-op and also by ShopRite. The last piece of music is called This Is My Country. Composed in 1940, one of its authors, Don Ray, later enlisted in the Army. Due to its patriotic theme, it has been recorded by a number of artists throughout the years.